Okay, one more week. B'ezras Hashem to Chanukah. The Gemara says only by Chanukah, my Chanukah, which not mine as opposed to yours, but my being Aramaic for ma. What is Chanukah? Where does it come from? What's the point of it? Obviously, the Gemara is not asking the question from scratch and saying we don't recognize this thing and just what is it? Why we have to do this? The Gemara knows exactly why they established it. That the people who authored the Talmud and the Mishnah, they're the ones who established the holiday of Chanukah. So, or at least going back, not then, but earlier, it was still, well, actually, it was Man based, second based in Mikdash around that same time. But they knew what Chanukah was all about. And then Gemara goes into a story and tells us that on the Yavanim and really Misyavnim, also the Hellenists too, the Greeks and the Hellenists came together and took over the land. It started off 180 years prior, or just a little bit less than that, when Alexander first came to conquer Asia, and he stopped in Israel. There's a famous story in the Gemara of Shimon ben Shetach, how the Tzaddokim, or the precursors to the Sadducees and the Karaites, they tried to make a pact with Alexander to get rid of the Perushim, to get rid of the frum world at that time, and they all kinds of false things that they said. They constantly were saying bad things about the Jewish people and how they were anti-Greece and et cetera, et cetera. And so he agreed to it in the beginning. But he was going to war in the meantime and fought all kinds of wars. And the process, every time before a war he went to fight and he was victorious the next day, he always saw the face of somebody he didn't recognize at all. And when he finally got to Eretz Yisrael, to Yerushalayim, and actually it wasn't Yerushalayim because the Gemara says that Shimon ben Shetach in the Bitei Kahuna, which is unusual, went out with an entourage to greet Alexander along the way, to show him kavod. Maybe also to keep him from getting to the base of Mikdash. And when he finally got there, Alexander looked and he saw the face of Shimon ben Shetach, and rather than comply with the Tzaddokim at that time, instead he told the Perushim, whatever you want, tell us, we'll take care of it. And they said, these are the enemies, these are the enemies, and they turned and they said, what happened? You were on our side prior to this, and all of a sudden now you are on their side. What changed? And he said, every night before I went into battle and I was successful, I would see the face of an elderly man, and I didn't know who it was until I came here today and I saw this is the face I saw in my dream. So Kadosh Baruch Hu once again, created the refuah before the makeh, the remedy before the illness by having Alexander have this dream and then be victorious when he got to Shalim. He would be in a good mood, and he would fight on behalf of the Jewish people instead. So the actual galus of Yavan started off more or less on good footing, but it couldn't stay that way for very long, and it lasted 180 years. At the end of it, of course, you have Antiochus, you have the Hellenists, and those who, because obviously a major part of Greek culture was to spread it to the whole world. They thought they were civilization. They thought there's Masoras that the early Greeks used to come to Eretz Yisrael to do trading and all that. They were more barbaric in those days, but they developed a kesher with people like Yirmiyahu, who lived at that time, and maybe even taught. And they took back some of these values, which may explain why Greek culture changed so suddenly, didn't evolve over time. But eventually, they got to the point where they had their culture, they had their ideology, and they're trying to spread it to the rest of the world, and therefore, and make the world more civilized. So it was just a matter of time before they did the same thing in Israel, and that resulted, of course, in the Misyavnim, the Hellenists, and then they took over all the different institutions, and you had, Kohen Gadol becoming Hellenists, and you had kings becoming Hellenists, and eventually it became very difficult to live a life as a frum Jew, and then that's the stage on which the story of Chanukah takes place. So after that, they came in, eventually destroyed damaged the base of Mikdash, they destroyed all the Shemen Zayis that was in the special jars that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol to make sure that they're still tahor, because even though you can use Tameh Shemen Zayis if you have to for the menorah, it's obviously preferable to use oil that was not defiled in any way. And then they found this one jar of oil after after a tremendously miraculous victory in the battlefield. That's the starting point of all this. And they came back to the Beis Hamikdash right away to light the menorah, and they had to build a temporary menorah because they didn't have the gold menorah to light and to the money to build a new one from gold. So they began with metal rods, and they put wood over it. Eventually, when they finally had the money, they finally they created a gold menorah once again. But that's the story. Then the Gemara goes and say it was a very happy time. Therefore, the next year they made a holiday, not that year because it's already after, but they made a holiday the next year. And from that point onward, Chanukah is celebrated, and therefore we say Hallel for 8 days and with light candles. And there's a discussion of the Gemara about what the actual mitzvah of lighting the Ner Shel Chanukah is, and Mikra Din, I mean, halacha is you light one candle each night. That's all to be yotze the mitzvah. You don't have to have extra candles, just one for each night. But the Mahadran is that you light one extra candle, or according to Beis Shammai, you light one. You start off with 8 candles the first night, then 7, then 6. They go the opposite direction, but eventually you have 36 candles altogether over the course of 8 days, and that's what the Gemara basically leaves off. It does go into some halachas after that about lighting the menorah, and there's a story that's connected in there somehow in some way, because the same people who taught the halachas of Chanukah came and taught a story about Yosef in fact this week's parsha. No, next week's parsha, Parshat Vayeshev. We're still in Parshat Yishlach, and the Gemara says that you can't place a menorah higher than 20 amas, right, which is about 40 feet, according to some opinions, maybe 30 feet, but high up in the air, right? Today, people put them on apartment building windows, 3 stories up, but ideally speaking, the menorah should be lower down. And the Gemara explains why, because the whole point of lighting the menorah is presuming Nisa, to proclaim the miracle. And if people can't see that you've lit a menorah, they might see a light up there, but they don't know necessarily it's a menorah. Of course, it's 2 nights, 3 nights, they start to realize it's got to be a menorah. But as the Gemara says, ein a shota be. The eye is not strong enough to see that far away, which is not entirely true physically, because as you see from apartment buildings, 3 floors up, you can see that it's a menorah. And the Gemara says after that, and it says because also like an eruv has to be within 20 amas as well, and also the sukkah, the schacha, the sukkah has to be within 20 amas. These halachas are all connected, and obviously there's always a deeper thread running through all of this. And then the Gemara says, and by the way, right, that they ask on the pasuk from next week's parsha, where it says that the bor was reik v'ein bo mayim, right? The brothers saw Yosef coming, and once they saw Yosef coming, they put him into a pit to decide to deliberate what to do with him, because they felt that he was a danger to the future of the Jewish people. And they put him into a pit, and the Torah says the pit was empty and it had no water. So the Gemara asked the obvious question and says, if the pit was empty, we also know it has no water. So why are you telling me both things? So the Gemara says, because Maim ein bo avan nechashim ve'kravim yesh bo, right? It didn't have any water, but it did have snakes and scorpions and serpents and things like that. So in this one pasuk, it's telling you that it was empty of water, but it was filled up with other things that were even more dangerous, because at least water doesn't bite and doesn't poison you. You might drown, God forbid, but maybe you can even tread water. You can swim for a while. Maybe it's a way to survive. But comes to poisonous vermin, it's very easy to be bitten and to die from the sting. And he didn't, obviously, because they took him back out of the pit in the end and sold him down to Mitzrayim. So it seems on the surface of it that they're not really connected, or to the story of Chanukah itself, but obviously they are. More than simply the fact that the same people who said one statement are the same people who made the next statement and the next statement. And even though it's true that the Gemara will often organize material in order to allow a person to memorize it better, because don't forget the Torah Sheba'al Peh was supposed to be memorized. So what we're reading in the Gemara are the discussions that used to take place verbally only in the had manuscripts, but not official books for like we have today. And to memorize, so you remember Rav Kahana, B'Shem Rav Tanchum, he said that, and he also said this too as well, and train of thought. But there's obviously a lot more to it than that, especially once it was written down. But there's a lot more, and somehow it's illuminating us on really what my Chanukah really means. Because we all know the story of Chanukah. I mean, you talk to small kids already in Cheder, they've been taught about it, they know about the Chashmonaim, the Maccabees, they know the story, the Lakis of Kaniyot, they know the Shem and Zayas, they learn from a very young age. So what do we need my Chanukah for? What does the Gemara mean by my Chanukah? What is Chanukah? What's the basis of Chanukah? So if I were to ask you, who made the Eitz Das Tovara? Who made it? Who created the Eitz Das Tovara? The obvious answer would be, there'd be consensus, I think, without anyone saying otherwise, unless we're trying to be funny, right? But the consensus would be that God himself made the Eitz Das Tovara. It's right there in the Chumash. God says, right? I've made a garden and I have put two trees in the center. There's other trees besides this tree, right? But there are two trees that are mentioned specifically in the Torah. One is called the Eitz Das Tovara, the tree of knowledge, good and evil, and one's called the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life. And God does not warn Adam about the tree of life. And quite frankly, given all the health kicks we have today and all the money we spend on trying to lose weight or gain weight, or just to take care of our bodies, and someone says to you, "This is the tree of life," it's this is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? Okay, I'm curious. I mean, it's nice to know and learn things, but what do we want the most? We want to live. We want to be healthy and happy. As they say, if you have your health, you have everything, which is not 100% true, but it's pretty close, because there's no question that health is a major part of being able to be joyous from day to day. The moment you just don't feel well, everything just feels different. Things taste differently. You experience things differently because you're just not there. But when your health is good, then you're able to enjoy things a lot more and to put up with the bad things a lot more if you have to. So, tree of life. This is the tree of life. Eitz Chaim. Wouldn't you want to know about that tree more first? And eat from it, maybe, and after that, then maybe turn to the Eitz Das Tovara. Even more so, the question gets even stronger, because Hashem even says that if on the day that you do eat from the Eitz Das Tovara, you're going to die. So it's not just that it's not the tree of life; it's the tree of death, and you're going to eat from it first. If you want to be smart about it, right? Can we just go over this one more time, God? Tree of life, right? This is like grants eternal life, and this other one, Eitz Das Tovara, which is very fascinating, right? And it's good to the eyes and the to the skill to understand. But death, right? It's the tree. This is the tree that causes death. Yes. So what do? Right? Yeah, poison and antidote. You take the antidote first, and if you want to try the poison, it's not the same thing here, but then you take the poison. You don't take the poison first and then run for the antidote. What if you don't make it? But that's not what they do, right? But in any case, who made the Eitz Das Tovara? And the answer, of course, would be God, because it says there right in the Torah. And the answer Kabbalistically is no. Adam, Harisha, he made the Eitz Das Tovara. Well, how is that possible? I mean, if that he should own it, it's his. He should understand it. What do you mean he made the Eitz Das Tovara? What about the Torah that just is talking about it over here? How did he make it? Right? He did some grafting, took some seeds, grew a tree. It was only within 3 hours all this took place. How could he possibly make an Eitz Das Tovara? The answer, of course, is Kabbalistic. It's not physical. It's Kabbalistic. Why? Because everything in life is about spiritual consciousness. Whether you know Kabbalah or you don't, it doesn't make a difference, because you are aware of the idea of levels of spiritual consciousness. Right? When a person is doing nothing but looking at the world outside the window or driving in the street, your spiritual consciousness is not really that high. You're mostly involved at that point in just everyday matters of everyday life. So you go to shul all of a sudden, or you meet your chavrusa. Especially if you're somebody who learns in the morning, first thing before davening, and you sort of drag yourself out of bed, and all your body's telling you at that point is that you are tired. You want to go to sleep, right? And forget about the chavrusa. You want to go back to bed. That's a very low level of spiritual consciousness. But you can't, you're already up and you're getting dressed. It's a routine and you know it. And you promise your body a nap. It's amazing what you can accomplish in the morning first thing if you promise your body a nap. You may not come through in the end, but as long as the body is convinced that you might have a nap, it goes along with you and gets out of bed. And you get to shul and your chavrusa is waiting for you and you sit down, you start to learn and a little rusty, a little slow at first. And then all of a sudden, you start to get into it for whatever reason. Somebody, talks to you and you get into it. And next thing you know, you forget about how tired you are. And you're already in a whole different reality. And by the time it comes time for davening, you're prepared. That's one of the greatest things about learning before davening. People, unfortunately, don't realize what they're doing to themselves. They might not care, but if those who do want to enjoy davening, why go through 40 minutes of misery or an hour of misery if you can enjoy yourself? Oh, yeah, it's tefillah, but you have to be there. You got to do it, so you might as well enjoy it. Why not? But they don't because their body is still getting out of bed, even though they've already gotten dressed and they're already in shul and they already have their tallis and tefillin on and they're ready to go, but their body's still getting out of bed and they struggle through the davening. And maybe at the end of davening, towards the end, they finally wake up and it's a different experience, but it's too late. It's already too late. You lost the Shemona Esrei, you couldn't concentrate. Shema was not the way it's supposed to be. But all of a sudden, if you learn before davening for just even 15, 20 minutes on your own with somebody else, it's tremendous preparation, especially if it's a topic or it's something that you get into and you really enjoy. It wakes you up. Your soul starts to take over the body, and by the time you're finished and ready to daven, it's a whole different level of spiritual consciousness, and we know that we experience these things on Shabbos. If you like Shabbos and you keep Shabbos properly, and it's important to you, so then you will rise in the level. I mean, who doesn't feel different when Shabbos comes in? Especially, I got to tell you, with all due respect to diaspora Jews, I've lived on both sides of the ocean, and there's a qualitative and quantitative, but qualitative difference between keeping Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael versus keeping it in Chutz La'aretz. So if you didn't experience in Eretz Yisrael, you might not know it even exists. But it's a whole different Shabbos. You just feel the kedusha much more. It is the land of holiness. It's a holy land. It's the land where Kosh Baruch Hu meant mitzvahs to be kept. It's the place where the Shekhinah is. The Shekhinah never leaves the Kotel, we're told, the Western Wall. Right? It's always there. It's always near Israel. There's even times the Jewish people aren't here. The Shekhinah is here. That's why we do have to go out. Because when Hashem says, we need to separate for a while, he keeps the apartment. He stays in the apartment, and we get booted out instead. If Hashem would leave, then we get to stay, right? But that's not the way it works. So the Shekhinah is always in Eretz Yisrael, the Medrash says. So Shabbos is a whole different experience. And as you experience Shabbos on that level, especially Friday night and sometimes even Shabbos morning, and there's things you can do to enhance that experience. Getting up early Shabbos morning at one point in time was the most insane thing in the world I could possibly do, to me. And I think to others as well. Shabbos morning, right? Davening starts a little bit later. Why not start a little bit later too? But I found you do that, then you're schlepping through davening. You're also tired, even though you slept more, and you don't get much time to learn. If you like to learn, you come home, you have a suda. There's not much time in some days to do the learning. So sometimes you're forced to get up a little bit earlier to learn before davening. But when you do that, it's a whole different Shabbos experience, and you can actually get to the point. And I am somebody person who loves sleep. I love sleep. Sleep is one of those things I enjoy very much, and yet the pleasure of learning on Shabbos morning when it's quiet and they're not up yet, and the sun is, but you're not, or even before the sun comes up on winter days sometimes. There's the pleasure you get from doing that. The connection to Shekhinah that you have is so tremendous that it actually inspires you to do it again the next week, even if you're tired, and the week after that, and then it becomes part of your program, part of your schedule, and your Shabbos is different. It's a different level of consciousness. So we know there are a level of consciousness. We know also from learning. The learning also, we have this thing called Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Simple understanding, hint, the exegetical, the midrashic approach to ideas, and of course, Sod, which is Kabbalah. They're not just levels of learning; they're also levels of consciousness. When a person enters into that reality, then they're also getting a higher level of consciousness. They're accessing higher levels of soul because the four levels of learning correspond to the four bottom levels of soul of nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya. So when a person goes from pshat to remes to dusha sod, you can do it all in one paragraph. But you do that, you're also going from one level of soul to a higher level of soul, and that's what life's about. A person's level of spiritual life and consciousness depends on the level of soul that they're able to access. We have to have five levels, all of us, because it's like a pipeline. Without missing one level, you can't be missing one level, or God forbid, a person would die or have to survive miraculously, but it doesn't happen. The five levels are there to act like a connecting, link between us and Hashem. So the light starts at the highest level of soul and makes its way down, but we're not aware of that. We're not conscious of that. We just know, here I am, I'm alive. I have a body, I have a nefesh, and I can feel myself doing things and see myself doing things. So I'm alive, but I don't feel my neshama per se, which is the third level up, or my chaya for sure, yechida, which is so abstract we won't see that level until the world to come. So the light coming down through all five levels, that's for everybody. But the question is, what level can you access on command, at your will, when you want to go to a higher level of consciousness? It's not, you just don't snap into it. Like anything in life, you have to be prepared for it. You have to be the proper vehicle to be able to achieve it, to go to a higher level of consciousness. In the beginning, when God first made the world, there was no such thing as Neitah Das Tavarah, even though the Torah talks about it. There was a potential for it, but it didn't actually exist. In fact, that's one of the reasons why it's called an Eitz Das. Eitz usually it means a branch. A tree is an Ilan, right? Chag Ilanot, the holiday for trees, Tu B'Shvat, coming up as Rosh Hashanah. Why is it called an Eitz? So the Orach Chaim says, because every tree in the beginning was just a branch off the Eitz Chaim. There were not individual trees. There was just one tree in the middle of the Garden of Eden called the Eitz Chaim, and every other tree was a branch off of that tree. So if you ate from the Eitz Chaim, its fruit, then you would taste every other tree in the Garden of Eden simultaneously. But what was its fruit? It's bark. The bark. How appetizing is bark? That's what Chava says. She looks at the fruit and she says it's nechmad le'anayin laskil. She had a taiva because the fruit itself looked delicious, but the bark of a tree doesn't look very appetizing. But that particular bark was different. There's the Torah, right? The Torah today, people look at it and say, it's like bark. They're not pulled in. They're not attracted to it. People who become Bali Tshuva rarely come in because I'm looking, for this thing called Torah. Where is it? Now it's like they somehow stumble into a class. Someone introduces them to it on some level, and then they find out how sweet it actually is. In fact, in Parashat Noach, when Noach sends the dove out to look for dry land, he comes back, of course, with the Alizayas. And all of us say, okay, that's what he found, an Alizayas. Takes one question to open the whole thing up. Is an Alizayas, a high tree, a tall tree? No. Spruce trees, elm trees, oak trees. There were other trees that probably were outside the water, and the lower trees were still inside the water. So where did he get this olive branch? Says the Medrash, he flew past all those trees. He wasn't interested in those trees. Went all the way to Israel, where, according to the Gemara, at least one opinion of the Gemara, the flood didn't get to. The flood did not come into Israel, so everything was all dry ground still, right? So there he found an olive tree, and he plucked off a branch from that tree and brought it back. Now, first of all, the Medrash finds reason to say that the sending out of the dove itself, was actually the sending out of the Jewish people into the Greek exile, even though we didn't go anywhere. They came to us instead, but that was all part of the divine plan. But the dove, because the dove represents the Jewish people. Different nations have different animals. You know, the Persians were the bears, and the Romans or whatever animal they were, right? Maybe the eagle, something. And but the Jews are compared to a Yonah because a Yonah is a dove is monogamous. Even after its spouse dies, it never takes another spouse. And the Jewish people, likewise, we stick to Kodesh Baruch Hu. So the Yonah, and just like the wings of a Yonah protect it, likewise the mitzvahs protect the Jew. So the Gemara is very emphatic about this, how we are compared to a Yonah. So the Yonah going out into the to look for dry land, says the Medrash, that's the Jewish people going out into the Greek exile. The Yonah comes back with Alizaias, and of course the Gemara and the Medrash says at that point in time that was the Shem Zayas, that the Jewish people are going to light because of the Neshel Chanukah, every year in Chanukah time. So embedded in the story of Noach and the flood. After all, Noach is the reverse image of the word Chain, and Chain is the shorish, the root of the word Chanukah. In fact, Chanukah means they chained on the 25th. Doesn't really sound right, but that's what the word would mean. If you translate the word as charms, they charmed, yeah, that works, right? Or grace, they graced. Those are English words that do fit into the context. But if you understand what chen is all about, then you have to. It changes the whole meaning of the entire thing. So clearly, there's a connection. But the question is, why did the Yonah go all the way to Israel, bypass all the trees, and work so much harder to bring back an Alizaias? So Rashi brings down the Medrash Agad, I believe it is, that says that the Yonah was making a statement. This was history version 2.0. The whole world just got wiped away except for Noah and his family and the animals. And the Yonah was bringing back a message. The Jewish people, this is their message. It's all tied together because we're the Yonah. And the Yonah said to Noah, better that my food should be bitter like an olive, but from the hand of God, than sweet and from the hand of man. Now, if you ask the average person what they would prefer, I'm not so sure they would agree with the Yonah. I'm not so sure they would go along with that. No, it's sweet. That in fact was the fundamental machlokas between the Greeks and the Jews and Noah in his generation, his time. Whether or not that's what's better. So the Daf is saying, let's face it, folks, this world is for connecting to Hashem. This world is for not forgetting about God. So God says, you come into the land, you become wealthy, and you're going to forget about me. After World War II, after World War II, we were conservative. The whole world was conservative. We just dealt with life and death. We're licking our wounds. We're rebuilding our cities and our families. It was horrifying. It was torturous. No one was leftist. No one was liberal at that time. There was even if they were, it was not the time to voice it. And then we did exactly that. We began to rebuild. We began to rebuild, and finally, Baruch Hashem, we had the '60s and then finally the '70s and prosperity, and everything was amazing until we get to today, where we have so much. And what's the world doing? Once again, we left this liberal, forgetting about the rules of creation, forgetting about what Kodesh Baruch Hu wants from mankind, and walking down that path again towards international disaster. That's what God warned us about, and that's exactly what always happens. That's what the Greeks wanted: easy, sweet, and from the hand of man, it's fine. Okay, see, if we have no, the Duff says that leads to destruction. Better, we're not saying that the food has. You don't have to go out and take a perfectly delicious tavshil and then add something bitter to it to make it taste bitter. There might be some people who do things like that, but you don't have to. But it's saying if that's what it comes down to, if it comes down to having something bitter, but staying connected to Kosh Baruch Hu, then it's better than if you have it sweet and from the hand of man. Because you get it from the hand of man, you forget about God, you forget about the purpose of life. That is the dove's message. That's the message of Chanukah. Thank you. And the olive works the exact same way. If you take an olive from the tree and you take a bite of it, it's not like an apple. It might be a little sour, a little tart, right? You might keep eating it, might not keep eating it, but it's not, you don't have to spit it out necessarily. Usually you wait till the apple looks like it's ready and you eat it, it's sweet, to wash it, not wash it, but take a bite. An orange, you take an orange off the tree, an olive, a ripe olive off the tree is bitter, very bitter. You take one bite, you will spit it out. There'll be no pleasure in chewing that olive. But if you take that same olive and you put it into an olive press and you grind it, oil will eventually come out of it. And you take that oil, which is a nice yellow, greenish color, and you put it into a little glass, and then you light it, and all of a sudden there's this beautiful calm flame, that's burning from it. And you get pleasure from that. You can pickle olives too. You can make them taste good. Add salt and things like that. But that's not the point. The point is that you start with something very bitter, and you end up with something very beautiful. Chava did the opposite, right? Chava, she saw something that was very sweet. Nechmad le'naim laskil was taivas le'naim. She wanted it, but in the end, what was the result? She got punished for it. She got cursed because of what she did. So whatever pleasure she had, it's like a child who's taking that cookie he's not supposed to have, at the risk of being caught and then getting caught. How many times in life is a person forced to say, "What was I thinking? What was I thinking? Why did I take that risk? Why did I do that thing? Look at the result. Was it worth it?" How many times do parents tell kids, "Was it worth it, what you did over there?" I mean, yes, it was. No, it wasn't. If you could go back and change it, do it again, you would do it and not do it. And this is what the Dove is telling Noah, starting off history. Just get this lesson down, and the world will be able to continue and go on. That's what the Gemara says also. Rish Lakish says in Shabbos that all the days of the week in creation, the first day it says Vehi er v'voker yom echad, Vehi voker yom sheni, shlishi revi. When it gets to the sixth day, it says hashishi, the sixth day. So Rish Lakish asks the question, why? What's the change? Why all of a sudden add the hay before the number when you haven't done the rest of the week? So he answers, and he says, because the Torah is teaching a lesson. The Torah is saying that if the Jewish people accept the Chamishu Chumshei Torah, which is the hay, alluding to the 5 books of Moshe, on the 6th of Sivan, so the 6th day now also alludes to the 6th day of creation, but also the 6th day of Sivan, 2,448 years later, then creation has permission to continue to go on, to exist. But if not, the world hereby is commanded to go back to Tov Vavoh, back to null and void chaos. So really the backdrop of creation, and physics has proven this too, the backdrop of creation is not calm and peacefulness. It is in fact chaos, which makes sense. Because if the whole point is to get to the world to come by making free will choices between good and evil, you have to be challenged. If life was only about sitting on your hands for 3 hours in Gan Eden, or 6,000 years, long time sitting in your hands for 6,000 years, but if that's all it was about, then there wouldn't be much free choice involved except just sit there. It still takes will, but not the same way. It has to be that you're going to be challenged in life by things that appear to be sweet, as the Yetzer Hara loves to portray it, even though the end becomes bitter. And likewise, the opposite. The Yetzer Hara says, why get involved in that? Why learn that? It's like so demanding. You have to keep Shabbos, you have to keep kashrus, you have to, taras mishpachas and all the different halachas that we have to observe that put such a strain on our everyday life. At the same time, trying to keep a schedule with kids and jobs and all that, it's bitter, right? But if you stick with it and you go through it, as the Medrash says, the nation that walks in darkness sees the great light. What's the great light? Is the Arhegenuz that God hid for tzaddikim l'asud. It's the ultimate pleasure mankind could ever know. We don't relate to it now. Not completely, you can. That's what Chanukah comes to do, to give you a taste of it. And the darkness, well, there the Medrash says is talking about the Talmud Bavli because it's so hard to learn. But if you stick with it, you work your way through it, eventually you'll see the great light. But it's also talking about life. All the walking the darkness means those times when Torah is not easy to live by, those times when the world does see Meshuggah and people are doing things that are really crazy, don't make sense whatsoever. And anti-Semitism is growing. And it seems like Kosh Baruch has abandoned us. And a person feels the need to jump ship, as so many have done over the last couple of thousand years. But the people who walk in darkness mean walk with Hashem, stay with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's why it's called halacha, because you're walking with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. You walk with Hashem, they'll see the great light. And when it's all said and done, yeah, there'll be bitterness along the way, but in the end, the light will shine. The Chashmanayim, what they had to put up with, the Perushim, what they had to live with, right? Keeping mitzvahs in secret, having to do mitzvahs at the risk of death, and put up with a situation that had no control over their land and lost control of the Beis Hamikdash. He was bitter. One of the reasons for the Haskalah movement at the beginning, at the end of the 1800s, at the beginning of the 1900s, I read in a history book, was because of the poverty. It was very, very hard to be frum because, especially in Russia and Poland, places like that, the poverty was unbelievable. And I'm not downplaying that whatsoever. We should never have to know from such things like that. It's not easy to try and do the mitzvahs when you have nothing. You can't go to cheder because you have one pair of shoes for 6 kids. They have to take turns wearing the shoes, and even the shoes themselves aren't even such protection against the snow and the cold. That's very hard. It's bitter, very bitter. But God says, that this is a world that's built like that. You don't like it? I can understand that. I can appreciate that. We were born in Gan Eden. That's where we started off. And we got kicked out. So it's like the same thing. And we just came off of a period of history of 30, 40, 50 years after World War II, our generation, it's been great. We've had a wonderful time. Not Gan Eden as the Torah prescribes it, but our own version of it. Jews had jobs without thinking twice. I used to travel to the States a fair bit, and I enjoyed myself. I liked being there. I didn't like being as Israel, but while I was there, there was lots to do as a frum Jew. Great yeshivas, great shuls, great mikvahs, great restaurants, so many of them, different types of food. Yeah, kef, and you could walk around with a kippah, black hat, without even thinking twice. Downtown this city, downtown that city, and it was okay. It was not a problem. And if there was anti-Semitism, it wasn't on the surface. You didn't see it on the surface. At least in most places that I went to, and the communities that I spent time in. But that's all changing now. We're now reverting back to what it was like for thousands of years. We're coming off that Gan Eden type period of time. We like to maintain it, and it's not as pleasant to listen to what's going on. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't hear something about what's going in this country, just with Jews alone. The Arabs are one thing, but just the Jews themselves, the corruption and the seemingly evil things that people do to try to undermine Torah values and the Jewish tradition. And it makes your blood boil. Very bitter. But you have to understand, this is what the Yonah was telling us, that stick with it. You got to stay with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Trust him for the process. But the original point, that Adam himself, he was the one, he's the creator of the Yitzadas Torah. How did he do that? How did he create it? He didn't actually create the tree. The tree was already there. Kabbalistically, physically, it was already there. But in the beginning, it was only an Eitz Das Tov. In terms of the spheres, and I'm not going to explain right now what those are. I've talked about this before, and there's lots of books, and you can just go online after this class, and you can look up spheres. They'll give you some great explanations. There's lots of sites today, kosher ones that will tell you about what the spheres are, how they work. But they're the basis of creation, the basis of history. And you have 10 of them. And the ones that affect our world, there's 6 specific ones, and they're the basis of the 6 days of creation, which are the basis of the 6,000 years that we've been living out. We're all towards the end already. And the beginning, that was the eights, so to speak, that love of reality. And the das, which is also a sphera, was high up and could not be affected, could not be corrupted in the beginning. Because the forces of evil, we call the klipas or tuma, spiritual impurity, whatever you want to call it, right? The forces of evil and impurity, they're only allowed to go certain levels in creation. They can't go too high or they'll destroy everything. So God is always maintaining them at a certain level. There's a certain amount of potential for evil in history, so we can have free will and make decisions and earn our schar in the world to come, but not too much when the world is properly balanced. Now, that's got to go too. All of it has to go. All the evil has to go. And Adam thought, this is a very deep Kabbalistic idea that I'm going to oversimplify tremendously, but Adam was anxious to finish off all the evil. He wanted to get rid of it completely. How do you do that? Well, how do you get rid of any evil? How does a person become a Baal Tshuva? How does a person go from being a completely secular Jew to becoming a Torah observant Jew and maybe even a tzaddik at some point in time? What changes? What causes the person to go from one level of consciousness to a higher level of consciousness? So what's the main ingredient? Well, it's called das. Das means knowledge, but it's a specific type of knowledge. It's a knowledge that makes you aware of the presence of God. It's a knowledge that allows you to appreciate the purpose of life, the value of the proper character traits. It keeps you lined up on the same page as Hashem. That type of knowledge. Not all knowledge does that. The knowledge of the Eitzah Das Tavara is more tactical. It allows you to take advantage of creation, to use it for good, to use it for bad. That's the only way it can be one or the other. Because knowledge itself can't be good or evil. Well, actually, that's not true. It can only be good. Can't be evil. Knowledge can't be evil. What makes knowledge evil? What makes a gun dangerous? Well, potentially it's dangerous because it can kill somebody, but it can kill a bad guy too. It can save lives by shooting the bad guy. So what makes the gun evil? The person using it. If the person using it is using it for a meaningful God-based reason, he's using it for good. If a person is using it to accomplish something that's bad and evil, he's using it for evil. Adam tried to rectify creation by getting rid of all the evil at the time. That was his goal. But he wasn't really equipped to do it. My grandfather used to always say when I was growing up, and I find this to be so true in life, not just in terms of what he meant it, but in life across the board. He always told me that every job, he was an electrician, and he told me every job is easy if you have the proper tools. And I found exactly that. When I've had the right tools to fix something, it's fun, it's easy to do, everything works more or less the way it's supposed to. But it's the same thing is true about life. If you try to accomplish something spiritually before you're ready for it, the damage can be horrific, can be catastrophic. If you're ready, if you have the proper tools, and then everything works properly. So Adam was trying to fix up everything by getting rid of all the evil in creation, by bringing the dust down into the world, bringing the light down into the world, to literally push out evil from every last corner. It's like going into a dark room. You have a flashlight, you can illuminate a part of the room. You turn the light on, and the whole room is lit up. There's not one part of the room, not a corner where there's not light. So Adam thought, well, this light rectifies. So he tried to bring it down into the world even more so. But unfortunately, it was premature. He wasn't capable of doing it properly. And rather than get rid of the forces of evil, he actually strengthened them. And that's when he transformed the tree of knowledge from one of just knowledge of good to the Eitzah Das Tov Ra. That's how the Eitzah Das Tov Ra came to exist, because now even evil can access knowledge and use it for its own purpose, as we see today. This is exactly what you're seeing with the internet and social media, right? All these things provide tremendous services for good. It's the people who use them and abuse them for their own selfish purposes that turn it into evil. And because you can't stop that, you can't block it, you can only become a victim to it. So people choose not to get involved with it whatsoever at all, because the danger is just too great. They're not saying that the internet is not a positive, good thing. They go to doctor's offices where they use internet to process information on their health. fine. But they're saying that the potential damage is so great that it's not worth even getting involved even for good reasons. That's what they're saying. And everybody else has to decide what they're holy, what they're capable of doing. What is it to do with Chanukah? And Yosef in the pit and the whole well and all of this, right? Ultimately speaking, Chanukah seems like the least of all the holidays. It's the last one. Pesach, Haggadah, the stories, Sipur, you see, Mitzrayim and Shavuos, of Matan Torah and Sukkot, of course, is its own greatness in its own way. It's Simchas Torah and Shmini Atzeres is the holiday itself. These are all great, but they're all part of the Torah itself. We expect all the sound and light show that goes along with it. It's like lighting a candle in a lit room on a sunny day. As the Gemara says, what good does it do? Who can see the light of the candle when there's so much brightness? Chanukah came along to teach the most important message of all history, of all life. But the only way for that light to be seen had to be amidst the darkness. So Kosh Baruch Hu waited 36, that's that number again, 36 centuries to bring Chanukah out, even though it goes back to Maaseh Bereshis, even though it goes even before Maaseh Bereshis, even though it has to do with eating from the Eitzadas Tov Ra. All of it, back at the beginning, it could easily have been a Torah holiday, but it wouldn't have been understood and appreciated the way it was meant to be understood and appreciated. So Kosh Baruch Hu waited until the darkest, when history was at its lowest point, at least until that time. It was the second base of Mikdash, but there was no Arna Kodesh. The miracles that were taking place in the first base of Mikdash were not taking place in the second. Even Herod himself was the one who finished it off. When the Greeks came in, there was nothing to stop them. At least by the Babylonians, Kosh Baruch Hu had to take the Shekhinah out and the Kedusha, and then said, okay, fine, now it's empty. But by the time that the Greeks came, there was never such Kedusha in the second base of Mikdash, not like the first base of Mikdash. No parochas, none of that. So it was a very low and dark point, but that's when the Kosh Baruch Hu said, oh, now the light's going to make a difference. It's very similar to what the Medrash says. The Medrash says, that a Kosh Baruch Hu gets more pleasure, gains more from the light that we ourselves light. We ask the question and say, he led us to the desert with a pillar of fire. At night, every night, the light, the sun, the moon, the stars are all his. What difference does our little teensy menorahs make to him? And the Kosh Baruch Hu says, no, that's the most valuable light of all. You know why? Because all of this other light, I made. All of this other light, it's all to do with who I am and my office, so to speak, as God. Sun, the moon, the stars, all of it's all right. So what value does it have when you, as a function of your own ratzon, your own free will choice, decide to light a menorah to proclaim my existence and my involvement in history? That's tikkun ma'aseh bereshis. That's taking the das that was pulled down into the world and affected by the forces of evil, and then pushing it back up again and protecting it. B'ezras Hashem. We got one more week before Chanukah. We'll go a little bit further next week. Have a good week. Shabbos, B'ezras Hashem, and B'sar Tovos.